Hello, and welcome to this latest GigaOm Research webinar, where we're going to be looking at the increasing value of e-signatures for driving automation and compliance. In today's session, we're going to be deep diving into the key criteria and radar reports that were recently published on this topic. My name is Bill Witter. I am a technical analyst at GigaOm Research, focusing on the application space. And I'm delighted also to welcome Sam Thorpe, Chief Product Officer of Nitro Software, who will be joining me in today's discussion. Thank you again so much, Sam, for joining us. If you could give a little bit more of a background on yourself and Nitro.
Wonderful. Thanks, Bill. It's wonderful to be with you today. My name is Sam Thorpe. I'm the Chief Product Officer of Nitro. Nitro is a global document productivity company serving much of the Fortune 500. We empower everyone to work smarter with the most critical and prevalent documents in their enterprise. We really add value to the entirety of the document lifecycle through PDF applications, advanced e-sign, as well as analytics to help you understand, measure, and manage your digital transformation journey and help optimize. So it's a pleasure to be with you. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, and certainly a very relevant expert in this particular space. So same here. Thank you again. Moving forward to the agenda. So as mentioned, we'll be covering the recent syndicated research that we've published on this space, e-signature solutions. As a quick refresher, that comes in two parts. We'll be looking first at the key criteria, the framework of the functional and technical requirements that we've defined as representative of the differentiation that you would see across this market landscape. And then we've taken that framework and sort of overlaid it on the major players in the market's current form. And so we'll be going through the results of that radar report as well towards the end of this presentation. But to start, we'll kind of level set as to what are e-signatures, kind of define the scope in terms of what this analysis looked at, and kind of talk about all the different market developments that have been happening in the space, quite a few accelerants. So we'll kind of just have a discussion to kick things off. So getting started, what are e-signatures? Hopefully a very easy question for anyone listening in. It's really, this solution space has become ubiquitous with how we engage with documents, both from a professional perspective and also a personal perspective. At its core, e-signatures aims to be a digital alternative to traditional ink-based signatures, thus removing that physical paper-based requirement from most document processes. The key here, outside of the major sort of efficiencies that can be garnered from this, is that there's no compromise on the sort of legal validity that these processes need to retain in order for the execution to be kind of legally sound from traditional sort of jurisdictional requirements. Outside of the kind of benefits of that efficiency save, there are lots of other reasons to kind of pursue the solution space. The kind of reduction in sort of distribution costs is another sort of cost savings, not having to use as much paper, certainly a climate impact as well, and not having to send physical documents to non-co-located parties. There's also a digital transformation element to this, and a nice side effect with using e-signature solutions, being able to kind of start to structure the data that represents that document, and then being able to kind of distribute that downstream in an automated fashion. And then certainly we'll talk more about this, but huge benefits from a user perspective, both from the sender side and also the recipient side, more tooling, more transparency, far beyond what a typical sort of email-based solution would sort of garner in today's age. The bottom of this slide kind of showcases where e-signatures are on the sort of full end-to-end document lifecycle. We're kind of focusing on that execution process to take you, from start to finish. The creation piece is obviously the beginning of any document's lifecycle. You can think of typical document editors that would support this. You then may need to sort of draft that document back and forth through different parties, and that's your collaboration through typical shared doc services. On the back end, after execution, if there was any physical requirements, you may have a digitization phase where you use OCR and NLP technologies to kind of reintroduce that document into the technology into the digital domain. And then obviously sort of the central storage of all the different metadata and artifacts that are produced in this lifecycle. Diving into execution, again, we've defined that as 3 different subphases: the preparation, distribution, and execution of the document. And so for an e-signature kind of workflow, we're looking at uploading of an existing document, tagging that document with data capture fields in a sort of preparatory phase. On the distribution side, usually it's email-based, kind of sort of categorizing the recipient details and when certain sort of requests should be going out. And then obviously from an execution perspective, executing that in a legally sort of viable and binding way. Sam, I will stop talking about this sort of life cycle because I know you're very familiar with it in all the things that Nitro does. I'd be really curious to just get your thoughts based on, you know, what customers are talking about. How is it that, you know, e-signatures are kind of a vital part of this this overall document management chain?
Well, I think that's great. I appreciate it, Bill. And this slide really well captures it. I think the reality when we think about e-signatures is the realization that they are oftentimes the middle part of the process. They're not really the end. So for us, in many cases, it helps to engage with customers to ensure that the way that they apply really gives them the flexibility for different workflows, but also the standardization where they need it. And so in some cases, it's really helpful to have just that broader set of the lifecycle covered, which is really what we aim to do as well, which includes everything from document conversion and preparation and templatization, but also handling the e-signature itself. But a growing need is obviously identity verification as part of this process. So even the signature moment, as depicted in this diagram, can sometimes include identity verification, dynamic document generation, and ultimately e-signatures. And so it's important, you know, in the context of e-signature solutions for customers also to be aware there's variability there. There is simple e-signatures, advanced and qualified, and I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit, but there's also a variety of signing methods like checking a box to indicate your approval or signing, or you know, squiggle signatures in addition to one-time passwords, either by email or SMS. So it's really making sure that that you're supporting the broader e-signature lifecycle, supporting identity verification, as well as really matching the right customer experience that you want to provide.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm always amazed, just, you know, everyone knows about this space, at least at the surface level, but there's an incredible amount of customization and sort of complexity that can be sort of defined by even the most simple sort of e-signature implementations. And part of the reason we're having this discussion today. So I think we'll hit on a lot of what you just said, but you know, certainly the boundaries of the e-signature solution kind of ebb and flow in this entire life cycle. It's all documents at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
So you've led us, you know, into a segue for the next slide. One more contexting sort of piece on what are e-signatures. Really, the kind of foundational momentum driver for adoption of this space has come through the wave of sort of legal clarification and sort of jurisdictions passing standardized criteria on what it means to be legally binding through an e-signature execution. Major jurisdictions such as the US through the e-Sign Act in 2000 and the EU in the EIDAS Act have paved the way for kind of setting up technologies to be able to be a trusted service through very clear enaction of those guidelines. And that's sort of spelled out a bit here in this 3-tier kind of framework for the different types of signatures. This is a bit born out of the EU in terms of the 3-tiering framework, although I think at this point most jurisdictions are familiar with this. Just very briefly, the simple signature sort of category is the minimum requirements of most jurisdictions to be legally binding in terms of execution. It's attaching the signature to the document, certainly a form, if not multiple forms of ID authentication, making sure the recipient is who you intend it to be, and then capturing all of the activities in an audit trail and storing that for future reference. These are very sort of purpose fit for simple sort of document use cases, but if more legal rigor and sort of complexity is required, you can bump up to an advanced signature. Usually there's more sort of ID authentication options. The end-to-end flow is encrypted, therefore ensuring again that the recipient is the one that you've intended in the outreach. And the document is tamper-proof. And so before, during, or after, that document remains as is. And then a digital certificate is kind of produced at the end of this for further kind of legal evidence if required in the future. Finally, qualified signature is really another form of advanced signature, but using specific providers that have gotten that qualified distinction in whatever jurisdiction you're operating in to kind of provide these services, these certificates, and in some cases, even specific devices to capture those signatures. So there is a real decision point here, Sam, in what signature type do I choose? How do I relate my use case requirements to this framework? And certainly resisting that gut reaction to just try to get a qualified signature adoption, because that appears to be the best, the most rigorous. Can you talk about what you see when customers kind of are at this decision point and what they kind of consider?
Yeah, it's a great question, and in many cases, customers are using a composition of these three signatures or two of them. So as you mentioned, it depends on jurisdiction, industry type of information, how much personally identifiable information is included, and then on use case. So while there is legislation that supports the legality of each type of signature that we see here, in some cases in the US, simple e-signatures is predominantly the mode that people use. In the case of life sciences or pharmaceuticals, they may add advanced or qualified signatures. But again, the US predominantly simple e-signatures. In Europe, where there is more concern over fraud and also more legislation in areas that govern specific types of contracts, then oftentimes advanced or qualified signatures are sought after. So the vendor can definitely help customers understand where they should be to augment their own research. But generally, for simple e-signatures, it's a lot of things like contracts, subscriptions, purchase orders, vendor agreements. In the cases of advanced signatures, you might have, especially in Europe, NDAs or master services agreements. And then qualified signatures are really when identity, and again, using a qualified trust service provider, which can help verify identity, validate identity for high value contracts, deeds, testaments, employment agreements, life insurance, mortgage, oftentimes requires a qualified signature in Europe. But yeah, hope that helps.
Yeah, it seems to still be a sort of complicated sort of series of matching your own use case requirements to one of these tiers. And again, I've worked in banks in the past, and that sort of feeling of, oh, I should pursue the highest tier just because it is the highest tier. Would you agree that there is a trade-off to kind of consider between that legal validity, but also the efficiency you're trying to drive. And as you add more kind of requirements to that process, the efficiency quotient sort of goes down. Is that at all, part of that discussion with your customers?
Well, yeah, it's absolutely true. And there's two or more considerations there. There's certainly the experience. So the more that advanced and qualified signatures require identity verification, there is more preparation and potentially friction, although valuable, certainly, as qualified signatures are almost more secure than a written signature. But it definitely changes the experience, and also qualified signatures oftentimes come with some additional cost because there may or may not be cost that's also required to be supported through the interplay with electronic identity providers be it telecoms, government agencies, or others. So cost and experience can play a role.
Yeah, makes sense. And also, just to point out, there are some documents that are never supported by e-signatures, at least not currently, right? I think wills and court orders, there are certain documents that are just out of scope for the time being that folks would need to consider as well.
That's correct.
Okay, all right. I think at this point we can kind of dive into some of the market updates, notwithstanding what's on everyone's mind still, the pandemic and kind of this massive accelerant of digital transformation, and e-signature kind of sitting in sort of the middle of all of this as a real kind of enabler of quite frankly, the new operating models that we need to support across the board. Sam, coincidentally, I know you've just done a webinar with us on this particular topic, this shifting paradigm of sort of work and hybrid models. Can you just talk a little bit about some of the takeaways there and why e-signatures are kind of the accelerated adoption of e-signatures are related to this?
Yeah, I appreciate that question. It's still fascinating to watch how quickly so much change has happened across the way we live and the way that we do business. Previously when we have talked about e-signatures, there have been some core benefits like accelerating the speed of business, really improving customer experience and reducing risk and errors with validation that can be put into contracts. Is different than sort of a written piece of paper. But with the shift to remote work, some new and obvious benefits have come in. So really supporting hybrid work and remote models, as well as the digital transformation that's required. So it's really enabled us to not only modernize the way we work inside of our businesses, but also the way that we engage with customers. So the way that we might be able to digitize and need to digitize more of the onboarding experience, which might include everything from identity verification to dynamic document generation, and then the e-signature process. So it's really, again, digital transformation is now a part of the benefits that customers are seeking. And I would also mention that the compliance and legal landscape continues to change, especially in Europe. But also Australia is looking very closely at EID efforts and having a national electronic identity, and we anticipate that need and that desire for identity verification and assurance is going to continue to march globally. So this is going to be a central part of these solutions, and it's the way that we think about it now as well.
Yeah, I mean, certainly in my own experience, I couldn't agree more. The question is no longer should we adopt an e-signature solution, which even just 5 years ago I was still hearing. It's now which e-signature solution should we adopt? It's become a core part of any modern day transformation strategy, and I think it's really interesting. There's so many side effects to adopting this solution set. You're forced to kind of standardize how you manage documents if you start suddenly funneling through your processes through an e-signature implementation. You now have to store it in a central place. You have to kind of categorize it in a certain way. You mentioned from a customer perspective, that starts to get standardized. I do really see this as a gateway to kind of broader uplift of many analogous processes within a space that touches every industry, every business unit in a typical enterprise. I mean, documents are everywhere, right?
I couldn't agree more. It's essential, and increasingly, it's how business gets done.
Yeah. So yeah, those are kind of the first two bullets of this slide together. Another point, as mentioned, starting to think about documents as structured data. And then being able to leverage that data from an execution process in an automated way in downstream systems just helps sort of broaden the transformation portfolio outside of just document management, which I think is also very exciting. You mentioned a lot around the kind of legal landscape. Again, there continues to be more familiarity and folks engaging with this professionally, personally. and there's a lot of trust. More countries, as you mentioned, more jurisdictions are coming on board with standardized guidance, and that's going to continue to be a driver, we imagine. And then from a vendor perspective, there's a lot of kind of acquisitions happening, certainly in the last few years. Previous sort of document services providers are now kind of acquiring e-signature solutions and broadening the kind of typical sort of scope of what an e-signature solution would give a customer. I know you at Nitro, Sam, kind of think about this a lot as well. So could you also talk about that? Why is that, kind of being driven by the consumer, and what goes into the strategy there?
Yeah, well, there's a lot about some of the consolidation that is driven by the fragmentation in the EU, and with differing regulations by country. It often means that individual countries have a collection of identity providers or qualified trust service providers that they work with, meaning that, well, what it's often done is forced customers or multinational organizations to use multiple e-signature solutions, or it has limited the markets in which an e-signature provider can play. And so, for us, it was, in terms of acquisitions, it was interesting for us to acquire a company. We acquired a company called Connective, which had a substantial integration with a number of e-identity providers and was a qualified trust service provider in a number of countries. And this allows us to move very quickly and do business pan-European and North American, as well as in APAC. And so for us, it allows us to allow multinational customers of ours to have a single e-signature provider. So that's a game changer for us. We're very excited.
Yeah, incredibly complex the EU market is, and to be able, as you said, to just use one provider is really a game changer. And I know identity authentication is kind of central to that. Also, sort of related, again, the end-to-end experience, we've sort of hit on this, but customers are demanding this from a sender perspective, but also from a recipient perspective. They want sort of barrier-free kind of remote optionality in how they engage with documents. They don't want to have to go to a physical location to execute something, and you're kind of getting both sides of the market in terms of demanding the solution set. Any other kind of momentum drivers there? And any thoughts on is this just from the pandemic, and this is going to sort of fizzle out with other sort of trends that we've seen the last few years, or is this more foundational?
I do think it's foundational, and it really expands the feature set that is required for e-signatures. And we'll probably talk more about the features that go into this, but the ability to verify identity, and then based on the information that has been verified and the aspects of identity, would be to generate documents on the fly that hold the contents of that user information to support onboarding or other aspects of document preparation, and then the signature. So more and more, I think what we're seeing is that the signature isn't just a signed document with an audit trail, but it really is a collection of workflow automation that enables that legal and regulatory compliant signature to be obtained. And it's not just the moment of applying the signature that goes into it. But again, I think that's one of the evolutions that we're seeing across the industry, is that vendors are challenged to provide a broader solution set for customers.
Yeah, I mean, maybe in the early days, it was very much a point solution. It was very small in that overall life cycle. And now it just has had to absorb so many different parts of document generation and ID authentication to really kind of mature, and I guess in the way that the jurisdictions are requiring it. Very quickly, without, of course, with great momentum comes some pain. I will say it's maybe a lot less than what we've seen in other kind of solution sets. But to point out a few, we've spoke about this one in the previous slide. Still some due diligence required and maybe some education and standardization into mapping use case requirements of an enterprise to selecting a signature type, and also future-proofing which sort of solution you're choosing. The requirements you have today or the documents you have in scope today may increase in breadth in the future. From a onboarding perspective, also from my own experience, because we're in the sort of legal landscape, legal and compliance teams are very much important stakeholders in sort of absorbing this technology into an enterprise. And they just so happen to also be usually the most traditional kind of manual-based teams as well. And so adopting something like an e-signature solution tends to be a bit of a larger step than if we were considering maybe a more digitized operations team or something similar. So generally a little more care and kind of an elongated ramp may need to be considered depending on the state of those sort of potentially legacy functions. And then finally, because document management is everywhere, in every BU they use it, nobody really owns it. And that is quite common in a lot of enterprises. And for an enterprise to kind of scale out an e-signature solution, they really need to kind of consider a central kind of governance model, even a central kind of team to help sort of manage the solution, but sort of standardize the process of the document lifecycle to ensure that we're not getting fragmented implementations across either a single provider or even multiple providers in the worst case, and that things like prioritization and cost are being managed in a coherent way. I said a lot. I don't know, Sam, if there's other pain points you're seeing. I'd love to hear about, maybe in your opinion, the biggest one right now on your radar.
I think these are well captured. There are a couple that I expand on within this group is really, again, having the flexibility across use cases, because obviously there isn't a single workflow in an organization. So you need flexibility in the solution where it needs to be applied to different use cases, but then also standardization in the way that, again, the signatures adhere to regulations. The other concern may be ensuring that you can begin these workflows from the applications that you're working in. So third-party integrations are really important. So whether that's Salesforce or SharePoint, being able to begin the workflow where the documents are, and then ensure, just like you're mentioning, the document management ends up being the final step of the process. So yeah, those would be some that we focus on as well.
Great. And all things considered, I think they're pretty minimal and largely, this is a story of momentum, and it's just unbelievable the last few years how synonymous e-signatures have become with document management, and as we said, should continue into the far future. Okay, so I think we're right on time, and we will kind of dive into now the syndicated research part of the webinar. As mentioned, two different parts. This first part will kind of talk through the requirements that we set out to evaluate the solution providers at the end of this report. Our key criteria is divided into three sections. We'll go through the table stakes, which represents the now, kind of the expectation of really any e-signature solution, representing the most mature capabilities, and also kind of creating a barrier to entry in terms of qualifying to be included in this report. In other words, if you're not doing one of these things, you're probably not a fully fledged e-signature solution. We'll then go into the kind of the meat of the report and the key criteria. Most of the differentiation happens here. Certain vendors offer certain elements of this. And there's a lot of differentiation within each requirement as well as to how it's been implemented. And then we'll talk about some things that are emerging. But the idea is that the key criteria, at least some of these requirements, kind of mature into table stakes in the next year or two. And then the emerging technology kind of finishes that cycle. And every year we kind of have a new view as to what we expect, what is providing differentiation, and what is coming in the pipeline. So this is a kind of a snapshot of this year, so to speak. So diving into this, the table stakes we'll kind of go through. Again, this is the minimum set of requirements to be considered a fully fledged solution set. The first one being pretty obvious. You need to be able to execute at least a simple type signature in a compliant and sort of legally binding way, depending on the jurisdiction that you're operating in. I think the model that I have in my head is that without this requirement, you may even be able to consider Microsoft Paint or something similar as a e-signature solution, because you're able to scribble on a signature to a document image. Certainly that's not the case. A lot more, as we've said, goes into that. And so it was very important to kind of include this in the table stakes to make sure we're not including more of that sort of document lifecycle. So moving forward, very much related to that compliant signature requirement is identity authentication. Sam, I know you're very much involved in this. It's a core part of Nitro's strategy. So can you talk a little bit about how this is implemented and some kind of key considerations for your customers?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a product called Identity Hub, and it supports a wide variety of EID providers, which stands for electronic identity. And so we support government issued IDs, telecoms, private. And so it's basically a flexible system, again, that works across country jurisdictions. And so again, it's really critical to the part of establishing advanced electronic signatures. And we can again, integrate this directly into workflows to make customer onboarding or user registration completely seamless. So powerful solution.
Yeah, and I would imagine just the ability to identify users can go far beyond sort of document processes as well, right? There's a lot of applicability, as you say, with onboarding, with kind of verification. With all of the cybersecurity and fraud kind of focus, this seems like a really important kind of solution set to kind of continue to focus on.
Yeah, absolutely. And the product we have that's called Identity Hub actually works even outside of the signature process. So if you're just seeking to verify identity as part of even a non-signature workflow, it can do just that, just what you mentioned.
Yeah, fascinating. So, certainly for the table stakes, we'd really be looking at a minimum set of kind of features here, maybe being able to access the recipient's email address, maybe a text message kind of code and that sort of thing. But, what you just described, Sam, would certainly be kind of above and beyond. So moving down the list of our table stakes, document workflow is really that core kind of set of phases that we described in the first slide, the preparation, distribution, and execution of a document within that execution phase. So this is the minimum requirement. At this point, we would expect an e-signature solution to sort of support at least that end-to-end sort of process and experience for our users. Moving forward, the monitoring and management piece, again, this is a benefit of e-signature technology. Outside of just your typical kind of email visibility, e-signature tooling should allow for you to kind of get transparency with what's happening on the external end, have recipients sort of opened requests, action requests, and so on. And usually there's some management tools to kind of help scale the outreach management in terms of dashboarding and sort of visualizations and things like that. So again, from a minimum perspective, we would expect some form of that to be kind of considered a modern day e-signature solution. Moving down the list, again, in terms of sort of compliance requirements, we would expect all e-signature solutions to generate an audit trail and sort of store the kind of important parts of this process in a central location, the document attached to the signature. Usually this also allows for a customizable retention policy depending on what enterprises would require. And then we mentioned this a few times, multi-option access, so barrier-free access for the recipient, being able to kind of interact with this request in any way that they so choose, any interface, mobile, web, desktop, and without the need for logins or downloads if desired. So that's kind of the focal point there, a bit more binary than the rest of the report. But anything else, Sam, from your perspective, given how fast the market is moving, would you add anything to this list and say that the expectation now is even more so, more than this list itself?
I think this is the key list. I think the only thing I might add is that the first line, simple compliant signature. Simple e-signatures is definitely the case in North America, but I think more and more it's viewed as table stakes in the European regions to also have advanced and qualified signature capabilities. This includes countries even, Belgium, Switzerland, and Singapore. So it's a great list, though.
Yeah, and that's a great segue into our key criteria, where the first key criteria is advanced signature, but you could argue that so many jurisdictions now require this, or if you are a multinational enterprise, you kind of have to look for a solution that supports this, that either this would be part of our table stakes already, or we would sort of divide out maybe the market segments in the future and look solely at kind of jurisdictions that require advanced versus simple. Completely agree with that, and that's kind of probably where we'll land given the way the market's going. Anything else around advanced signature? Is there a lot of variability within this tier itself? You're mentioning other countries kind of onboarding to this, but are there sub tiers starting to develop that customers need to consider as well?
I think the biggest thing to consider is just making sure that you understand which regulations map to which use cases. So that's really the biggest thing from my perspective.
Makes sense. Okay, so again, putting advanced signature within the key criteria really just sort of signifies how much differentiation is within this sort of space itself. Certainly there are vendors that don't offer this as well. A conscious effort to focus on simple signatures, which is perfectly fine. But as a certain enterprise, certainly multinational, you'll need to kind of consider a subset if this is an important part of your document requirements. Moving down the list, data fields and templates, an incredibly important part of this. We've mentioned a few times, but the ability to kind of tag a document with structured data elements and capture points is an incredible benefit for e-signatures, for implementing an e-signature solution. And really, there's a lot of differentiation, a real spectrum between what sort of providers can offer you in terms of, at the most basic level, very simple sort of standard fields such as signature, date, maybe name, the ability to drag and drop in a sort of no-code interface onto any place in the document. But really, there's so much more you could do with this step, allowing for custom data fields, allowing for sort of conditional rule sets and visibility logic to allow for a dynamic experience as you fill out the document. In certain fields, other fields either disappear or appear. And then, of course, being able to sort of integrate with other data sets that you have on the domain side, right? So if you have client data and you have sort of a client details field, being able to auto-populate certain portions of that for additional efficiency. From the template side, being able to kind of save all of this, of course, but really the amount of customization that's available on the higher end of the spectrum really elicits to just being able to generate documents from scratch. I know, Sam, you kind of mentioned that previously. It's kind of an incredible function to have housed within the e-signature sort of suite. I know, Nitro was born out of sort of PDF productivity tools. So is there any kind of advantage there, understanding how documents function and being able to offer sort of as much customization as possible during this preparation phase?
Yeah, certainly document conversion, creation, editing, manipulation, and preparing that for signature is definitely a key part of really everybody's workflow. And then that plays right into templates as that are mentioned here. So that gives you then the ability to streamline your workflows and really reduce and eliminate repetitive tasks. And then again, a big part of, and you've touched on a few of these, is the application and service integration, is really being able to originate document workflows from where the documents are residing. And so vendors really need to maintain a rich and growing library of third-party applications and connectors. And then maybe, the other one that I think is maybe part of business customization is data residency concerns. And so whether you're in the EU or North America or in Australia, APAC, oftentimes there are regulations that really require data to remain on the soil of country and to be administered and supported by resources that are also in that country. So that's another consideration depending on your business.
Yep, absolutely. I kind of will ask a few questions then. On the advanced distribution side, this is sort of, your workflow 2.0, again, being able to kind of customize parallel tasks, sequential tasks, multiple recipients. Interestingly enough, we found that a lot of the vendors are offering sort of very similar kind of versions of this. Is this kind of, one of the most mature sort of parts of this list? Do you think that the workflow element and the way that, recipients are kind of codified within that is as far as we can go? Or because I know in some cases you could get to a point where you have almost like a business process editor where you can have a completely custom sort of workflow that you're automating different parts of maybe the broader e-signature workflow. Is that something on customers' radar? Is that on your and Nitro's radar?
Yeah, those are things that we look at as well. And some of that is in also the contract lifecycle management space, where maybe depending on the size of a contract, the value of a contract, it might be routed differently or require different approvals. The same can be true in facilities and purchase orders. So oftentimes, yeah, it does get really close to a business process management application for sure. It's a great call out.
I am a process nerd, so I couldn't help but do that. Okay, I mean, other things to consider here. Bulk invite is a bit of an edge case, but something that at least I've seen come up a few times. Not as much differentiation here as well. Being able to ingest sort of client details through maybe a CSV file and be able to kind of manage a large amount of outreaches at once is kind of key here. And from an analytics perspective, it's really the ability to kind of maybe customize those management views, having visuals to kind of interact with, and potentially even kind of supporting custom metrics. Another benefit to this e-signature adoption is the amount of data that you get inherently from digitizing this process. And so it would be best fit to kind of take advantage of that, and great to have that offered out of the box in some of these providers. As always, Sam, I'll ask you, is there anything here on your mind that that should be here, or that, again, maybe is a bit more of a table stake or a bit less of a focus in what you're seeing in the market?
No, this is, again, I know the previous slide talked about table stakes. These are definitely key criteria. More and more, the composition of these items are part of every customer discussion engagement we have. So I think this is the list. I added data residency, and that's really dependent on the way the organization does business and what regulations they're subject to. But it's a great list.
Yeah, that's definitely a good call out. Okay, moving right along. The final sort of section of our key criteria. These are kind of two call outs that we had in the report. Just very briefly, it would make sense as analytics are more supported within the typical implementations we see today. We would start to apply AI to automate insights in sort of a no-code kind of prepackaged way. So we would expect that to be a bit more of a kind of major offering in the future. And then a call out around blockchain. On paper, this feels like a good kind of match, as blockchain helps with that sort of evidencing of process and sort of tamper proofing in a way that would be relevant to the execution process. I don't know if you have any experience with this, Sam, but it feels like it's very much in experiment mode. It's not really been commercialized, certainly. And even if it were to be in its current form, it doesn't offer a lot of it doesn't offer a unique value proposition that would change how users and recipients kind of interact with this process, at least from my kind of brief experience with it.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot about this space that's still evolving. Blockchain holds a lot of promise, and it may be within the signature space that it's most interesting in sort of a network effect application, maybe within supply chains where you might want to provide extra level of transparency across the supply chain. But yeah, we're watching it very closely.
Yeah. I don't know if there's been talks of being able to eliminate sort of central timekeeping and maybe even the sort of provisioning of a digital certificate, but that feels pretty far away, and a lot could happen as we move forward with this whole market.
Yeah. Sure.
Anything else, again, on your mind that you would add to this that you think would be very relevant in the next couple of years?
Certainly, again, as you have here, blockchain and AI and machine learning. One of the other things that we look at is identity wallets and being able to expand. Wallets are often a topic within blockchain and cryptocurrency, but really identity wallets that hold more than, obviously cryptocurrency, but documents related to your ID, driver's license, potentially medical records or other sensitive information that you may want to use. Be able to use and access in a variety of situations. So identity wallets, I think, will be an emerging category as well.
Yeah, makes sense, and very much related to what you guys are investing in now. Okay, so moving forward, sorry, this is the last section. So we talked about the actual criteria, the requirements, that is the what. This is the how, and so we kind of look at our evaluation metrics and see how each of those requirements would perform based on these different sort of categories. Just very quickly to kind of define them. Flexibility is in terms of breadth of support for different use cases across a particular jurisdiction. So how many countries could be supported by a particular solution, how many languages, how many file types, how many third-party applications are available to be integrated very quickly and seamlessly. And so all of that together would bring about a flexibility score to indicate how often you could use a solution, or maybe use a solution for everything that your enterprise would require. From a scalability perspective, pretty straightforward. The amount of concurrent users and processes that are able to be supported at any one time without any service degradation. Ease of use, a bit more qualitative, but the way in which the UIs are set up, the way in which a user would sort of navigate and find functionality, and the sort of metric, at least I have in my head, is how hard it is or how long it takes to onboard to a particular provider, how much sort of support that enterprise or that team would need. That usually is an indicator of ease of use. Of course, there is a inverse relationship between the amount of functionality and complexity you add to a solution and how easy it is to onboard to it. So that's certainly considered. And this most simple sort of solutions are usually the most easy to kind of just start using. But we sort of look at both sides of that equation. Security and compliance, we've spoken about a lot. I'll just add, again, to what you've been saying, Sam, a lot around ID authentication that is considered in this evaluation metric, whether or not you can support specific country sort of requirements. You have your standard sort of GDPRs and ISO certificates that we would look at as well. And any sort of specialization, whether you can support payments or healthcare data through HIPAA, those sorts of regulations or certifications we look at as well. And then finally, around cost, I think this is a really unique market. It's a pretty sort of transparent sort of costing model and pretty straightforward. It's usually based on the amount of users or the amount of requests that are sent in any period of time. It can be altered depending on the features and functionality that you request and what packages may be supported. But we certainly look at that as well to kind of round out the how in which the solution is offered to the providers. I'm sure, Sam, you have some thoughts. I know costing in particular is kind of a strength of Nitro, at least in terms of the transparency. Do you want to talk a little bit about that in particular?
Yeah, in terms of these evaluation metrics, these really are the key ones. In many cases, our customers are considering each one of these. Oftentimes, as you would imagine, cost is at the top of the consideration stack. Certainly, there are high value and lower value use cases, high volume, lower volume. So sometimes you can have high volume, high value, and high volume, low value. So it's really making sure that the cost that you're incurring is benefiting the speed of the business, and you're not is supporting the speed of business, and you're not overpaying. So some vendors provide per seat, per user licensing, and others transactional limits or minimum transaction volumes and transactional pricing. And so we really offer both, and for different plan contexts to really map to what customers are trying to accomplish and provide a lot of value. We're also big on, I think it's important, just speaking generally for customers, is understanding the total cost of ownership. And so whether, again, you're mapping costs to high value or low value transactions appropriately, but also the hidden fees and overage charges are something that you understand going in. So just as you shared, Bill, and I appreciate it, Nitro really makes an effort to be very transparent, fair, and upfront with customers. So it's a strength of ours.
Yeah, certainly. The transparency factor, weighed greatly into this, and certainly from my experience as well, that's what's on people's minds. You see an upfront amount, but there's some skepticism in what that translates to over time as your usage grows and so on. So makes sense. Okay. So finally, we'll finally sort of talk about the results of the analysis. This is our radar report. So again, we've used that criteria that we just went through and scored each of them against these vendors, the sort of top players in the space currently. To kind of define the diagram itself, there's 4 different quadrants. On the y-axis is sort of the maturity focus. And so on the upper level of this diagram, you have vendors that are looking to kind of develop and mature a kind of consistent set of features and technical requirements that are broadly available. Whereas on the bottom, there's a bit more of a niche kind of environment. Vendors are looking at things that are maybe for a particular use case or not yet widely adopted within the market. And then on the x-axis, you have whether the breadth of the solution. So again, whether on the left side, the vendors are looking at particular features to kind of hone in on and specialize in, or on the right-hand side, the kind of platform plays being able to support the end-to-end solution for various consumer use cases. One other sort of dimension are the concentric circles within these quadrants. And so depending on how these vendors have scored, you're either in the leader circle, which is the dark center. As you go further out, you have our challengers in the middle circle, and then you have new entrants, which in this particular report, we didn't have any. And I think that just speaks to the massive amount of maturity and acceleration that we have in this market. There was just so many providers to choose from that really had substantial offerings to consider. I'll kind of ask you a few questions, Sam, in a second, but just to orient, the general themes, I think it makes sense that the vendors are mostly on the platform side based on what you were describing, consumers wanting that end-to-end experience. We have some sort of top left-hand kind of vendors looking at more simple signatures and point solutions for a smaller enterprise market. And then, of course, you have on the bottom some niche players focusing on different content types, different sort of deep integration with certain third-party apps, and sort of different kind of angles of analytics from a risks perspective. So I'll stop there. I would love to get your thoughts on how you feel about this. Do you think this is reflective of the current state? Do you think we've already moved on and we're somewhere else? And any thoughts there?
Well, I appreciate it. We're proud and excited to be shown alongside DocuSign and Adobe. We're very proud of the solutions that we offer. Similarly, as you mentioned, we're big proponents of really a platform play. We're viewing e-signature as part of a solution that you're looking for, and we aim to offer our customers value that is additive, above and beyond, and supportive of the electronic signature process. So again, proud to be included with DocuSign and Adobe. And some of the ways that we do it is not just in the features that we've shared, but is even in the API that we can bring to bear to support customers doing their own integrations or proprietary integrations. So we offer APIs that support document manipulation, electronic signature, workflow, identity assurance, as well as document generation, all from a single provider. So again, thank you so much for the inclusion. We're proud to be a part of it.
Yeah, I mean, it was just based on the quant side of this, which makes this a fun sort of analysis to see where everything kind of lands. But it does feel like this is reflective of the market. Certainly Nitro and the other kind of document providers in that leader space offer all of the key criteria that we just focused on at the higher end of sort of the advanced spectrum. So this kind of makes sense sanity check wise. Any other thoughts here? Do you expect this to look very different come next year or the following year? Do you guys have on your radar new entrants or new sort of niche kind of offerings that potentially could change this landscape?
It is tough to say, especially in the economic climate that we may be moving into, but I imagine we'll see further consolidation and maybe separation between the players. I think one of the things that we think about as the global economic climate continues to change is one of the things that Nitro aims to do is provide more capabilities for the same value. So it's part of our competitive position. And in our view is that, these type of workflow efficiencies are so effective, not only in certain pockets of the business, but really across the broader organization. So from a cost standpoint, our goal is to allow you to roll out these systems, enable and empower the entirety of your workforce. So that's where cost actually is. It's not just cost, but it's just how widely can you deploy. So that's part of one of the ways that we think about our inclusion amongst the leaders here.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Hopefully the economic impact is not too substantial and we can kind of continue forward with this sort of accelerated rate of maturity. We'll just go through the last few slides briefly, but this is kind of the back end of that diagram. This is how we generated the mapping onto that radar. A few things to call out. We look at market segments, so how well positioned each vendor is in supporting smaller, medium enterprises or businesses versus large. Again, here there's definitely two schools, one that is looking at just simple signature offerings, very sort of streamlined sets of features, but catering to a small sort of client enterprise sized client base, whereas some of the larger players that we saw on the platform side definitely cater to the larger enterprises. One key criteria here that always came up was role-based access control. And so absolutely, you need the ability to kind of deploy this solution across multiple teams in an enterprise, a larger enterprise, without sort of exposing sensitive data across those boundaries. So that was one kind of key differentiator. From a deployment model, I think less of a spectrum. Really, in this day and age, every vendor here offers a pretty potent sort of SaaS solution. There are certain vendors that offer on-premise support, but that is, I think, a trend that is declining in terms of how these get deployed. I don't know if, Sam, you have any sort of other comments on this or any surprises in this data?
No, again, one of the things that I think is represented here for us is that we really focus on flexibility and scalability so that we can grow with you. We do offer, all of the deployment methods from cloud, on-prem, and hybrid or private cloud, but certainly I think that there's a lot of advantages in cloud deployments these days, especially as it plays into patching, enhancements, and security. So the trend is definitely cloud over all other deployments, but again, we're happy to be a strong provider amongst this list.
Yep. Then very quickly, we've already covered this, but this is the data behind the key criteria. Again, lots of differentiation in terms of which vendors offered advanced signature, how data field sort of customization was supported, and a lot of variability around analytics as well. Where there was less differentiation was, again, around the sort of automated workflow component. A lot of the same features were represented across the space, and business customization as well. A lot of the same branding kind of features and things we spoke about are pretty consistent across at least this list. And then finally, the evaluation metrics. Again, a lot of variability in how flexible some of these solutions were, dependent on how many jurisdictions they could support, how many languages, and so on. Scalability was pretty consistent, again, in this day and age. Sort of runtimes are pretty well stable. Ease of use, again, correlated to whether or not the focus was maybe a small to medium-sized businesses, and therefore there was less of an effort to onboard, while kind of receiving a subset of the feature list. And then some variability around compliance and cost, again, as you mentioned, Sam, in terms of how things are packaged, how they're transparent, and how they kind of change over time as usage grows within a particular subscription. So hopefully nothing surprising here. I think we're almost out of time, so I'll kind of just cut to our last slide. But I really enjoy this space, and it was just a pleasure to have you on, Sam, particularly because you're kind of in the weeds, you're on the ground, and like really riding this wave of accelerated adoption. Any kind of final thoughts we could end on with how you feel about where we are and where we might be in the future?
I think this was a great overview. Bill, thank you so much for including me. I would just final thoughts for potential customers, prospects, people considering e-signature solutions, to really emphasize security, compliance, and cost. And not all signature providers provide high trust capabilities, but certainly the way the industries and the regulations are going, these are likely capabilities that you're going to need. So again, make sure you're selecting solutions that will grow with you, that you understand the total cost of ownership, and that's inclusive of, again, hidden fees and overage charges, and be sure that as many features that you're going to need in the long term are included in the plans that you're selecting. But all in all, Bill, it's been an absolute pleasure to be with you. Thank you so much for your time and your inclusion in the report, our inclusion in your report.
Yeah, happy to chat. I'm sure we'll be chatting in the future, but until then, thank you so much, and we'll sign off here.
Have a great day. Thank you.
You too.